Okay, cool. Yeah, so welcome everyone that's joining in. I think there's more people in the waiting room, but we'll let them trickle in. First of all, I would like to um, acknowledge that the Fine Arts Reading Room is based in Jagjage, colonially known as Montreal. Therefore, we must acknowledge that this entire island is located on unceded and unsurrendered Indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are recognized as the custodians of the land and waters on which we gather today. Jagjage has historically been an important meeting place for different Indigenous nations. We must acknowledge the unique and disappropriate hardships that Indigenous people have faced and continue to face as a result of colonialism. And it's also, I know some of you are tuning in from the unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, as well as I think some of you are from Hong Kong at like 8 a.m. Like, bravo for tuning in. And just we encourage settlers to acknowledge their privilege and question how they are working to integrate perspective and politics of anti-oppression and into their lives and work. And so a bit about who we are. So I think it's just me and Jules. Is that correct? Yeah, me and Jules are part of the Fine Arts Reading Room, which is an organization run from Concordia's fine arts students. And we're committed to maintaining this student space on campus that's dedicated to supporting and promoting small alternative publishing dedicated to the fine arts community, as well as the development and collection of print-based resources. Yeah, so in addition, we are like programming these series of workshops, and this is I don't know if this will be the final one this summer. Like I think we'll plan on having more for sure. But we're very, very pleased to welcome Queer Reads Library. And a bit about Queer Reads Library, I think it's just Rach and Kaitlin here today. The Queer Reads Library is a collection of books and independently published zines centered around queer narratives and themes. Established in 2018, Queer Reads Library is a collaboration between artist-curator Kaitlin Chan, artist-writer Rachel Lau, and artist-publisher Beatrix Peng. And yeah, without further ado, I'll drop Queer Reads Library social media links in the chat. And I will welcome Rach to take it away.
Should I will start, I guess. So thank you for that lovely introduction. It's really nice because I've actually known Jules and Le for a while now, and so I think this is the first time we've actually gotten to collaborate in some way, and it's really lovely to have continent to continent, coast to coast participation in this workshop. So it's like the most epic collab of all time. I think it was like that Avengers movie was like the saying. Anyway, whatever, pop culture. So I'm Rachel. I use they them pronouns. I'm one of the co-librarians of Queer Reads Library, which Le gave a lovely introduction for. So yeah, we're talking about sorting zines today, and there's a silly photo of me swimming in my zine collection because that's how I feel when I look at my zine collection. It's just like everywhere. But in terms of like my actual zine journey, so to speak, and how I got into it, it's funny because I actually made my first zine ever in 2018, and that was right before I left Vancouver to work in Hong Kong. And it was in Hong Kong that I had the pleasure of meeting Kaitlin and Beatrix, who introduced me to the world of zine making. So that's how I really got into it in Hong Kong, was when I cranked those out after learning more about them through Kaitlin and Beatrix. In terms of how I've acquired my zines and how it's grown to be the overwhelming like pile that I'm swimming in, a couple of ways. I think when I really got interested in zines in Hong Kong, I kind of was a little bit like very enthusiastic. So I bought a lot of zines at different book fairs in Hong Kong. So there was the Daegun art book fair called Booked, and I think that was the first one ever. That was the debut like book fair there. I remember going to Osaka, like it's called the Kitakagaya Flea Market, but there's also like an Osaka book fair there, which Kaitlin and I went to as well. I had the pleasure of also attending a smaller book fair that was at this venue called Bedroom in Hong Kong. So yeah, throughout those different events, I collected a lot of zines. And I'm sure like the fellow zinesters here in this like event know that once you meet one zinester, it kind of just like one after the other, and next thing you know, it's like you're a whole network. So I've definitely acquired zines by trading with other zinesters, which I think probably is my favorite way of acquiring zines, because it's just so nice when it's like no money is involved and you're just like appreciating one another's work for what it is. And you open up that, mail and you're like, oh, I got a zine from another zinester. Best day ever. In terms of when I realized that I needed to organize my zines, I think it started to become out of hand when I had like sort of unnamed piles of books in my room. Like I'm just like my family would walk in, they're like, your room is so messy. I'm like, it's organized chaos. Like I know where everything is. But I think when it started to pile up, I think it really became clear that it was time for me to think about how to organize my collection and how to make sense of the material that I've been collecting. So, I'm just as much needing this workshop as everyone else is here. Yeah, I'm gonna let Kaitlin take it away with her introduction.
I just want to quickly thank Jules and Lev for making this event possible and doing all the work to like set up the event infrastructure. It's like so fun to collab with y'all, and like Lev's a plant. Are we not going to talk about the fact that like have a sprout coming from their head? It's so great. Zines. So kind of a zine freak, and I think like obsessions, it happens very gradually, so you don't think it's a problem. You're just like, yeah, I just have a few, and then you have like 100 like the next day. Yeah, as Rachel said, I guess zine collecting kind of is a very like friendly, low stakes way to reintegrate yourself into art making, especially if you like didn't go to an arts college or you feel intimidated by like the formal teachings about art. So it was like around the same time that Rachel really got into zines, and there was like more artist run spaces operating in Hong Kong. And there was like the first international art book fair. And as excited as I was that zines were starting to like become institutionalized in the past few years in Hong Kong, I think I also felt a little resistance about like formalizing something, because I remember like me and Rachel went to Kitakagaya Flea in Osaka, and then people had like zines that were produced like formal catalogs, like they had really formal and precise packaging, and it got me thinking a lot about how like respectability is it's really easy for that to creep into all kinds of practice. And even though I love and admire people who want to do stuff at like the highest level of production and like really finely finessed, I want to also make room for stuff that's just like difficult to categorize, difficult to store, messy, off the cuff. I think that's kind of like a really important like aspect of zine making, is to embrace like errors and failures and like in a really self-compassionate way. So I think that's sort of my whole zine ethos. So I got into it very similarly, like around graduating college, 2017, 2016 time. There was like a odds and ends art book fair at a university like near the one that I went to. And then I'm like just one of those classic, Asians who can't drive. So I had to like beg my friend to drive me to this fair. And seeing all these zines and seeing the fact that people like weren't like censoring themselves and they were just making them like without asking for permission to be valid or be seen was really like powerful for me. So, and also like I'm kind of shy, so I have difficulty talking to people sometimes. So sometimes I just like buy their work so I can like get to know them better. So I don't have to like talk to them. I don't know. It's like zines as a kind of conduit to like loving people and getting to know people and joining social movements, I think is like a very important conduit. But when I realized it was getting really messy was when, similarly to Rachel, I just had all these like ad hoc ways of storing and organizing things, and then thinking like, oh, whenever I want to show someone something, I have to like do that thing like you used to do through records where you like tab through all of them, and like it's kind of fun but also a little stressful. So I also need this workshop, and that's why we're doing it. So yeah, that's kind of the short and long end of things. Should we move to storage solutions, Rachel? Let's talk shelving.
I think we're gonna survey the audience first, right? Because we want to know, like, we were talking
Yes.
about our struggles with zines, collections, but we want to know what it's like for everybody else. So, I mean, what is the most challenging part of storing and organizing your zine collection? So if you're feeling spicy, you can turn on your camera or your mic to tell us. You could even show us your organized chaotic piles like me. Or you're welcome to put it in the chat and let us know. Okay, the chat.
I love that Lit stores their zines at the Fine Art Reading Room.
I know, I was thinking like community storage solution. I feel like
It's a great
secretly
idea,
that might be what Query's library is too, except we're mobile, so technically not really.
Yeah, I'm surprised how mobile you are. Like, I think I have a bunch of zines here just in inventory. Like, I just printed some today, actually. All these zines. But yeah, I genuinely just like sell them and then ship them to Calgary where my parents are. And then they just have like a bunch of random stuff that they'll never read and I'll never have access to. And then the rest that I want immediate access to, I just like leave them in the Fine Arts Reading Room. But I don't think that's like very long-term sustainable. And I'm just curious of how like other people try to, and especially when you move so much, like I move so much that I just don't really want any more zines, but then I also want everyone's zines. So
yeah, I think it's difficult not to like fall into the very like visualize and monetize trend of like being really minimal as a millennial and like not owning too much stuff, which is like fair because some people like have different relationships to stuff and material and scarcity. But as you said, like it sometimes feels like just more satisfying to have a zine than a PDF, and then that's going to take up space in your life. And from the audience, some people are mentioning that sizes are an issue. So just pivoting to what people are saying in the chats, Katie says, different sizes are my biggest issue. Also staple versus bound. Should the bound ones go in a bookshelf? Think about this all the time. Yeah, because it's like, does it stand up or does it fall down? No, I think about this a lot.
And sometimes zines kind of slump like, and you're like, should I keep it in that position? Like,
zines have bad posture. Yeah, they're very
yeah, they do.
Slippy.
Flora
says,
oh, no, continue.
You go.
Oh no, I was gonna say I like Astrid's comment because they said I put them in other books and then I can't find them. Lol. And that's hilarious because I actually learned this from, I think it was Renee Ng, who's actually I think in the room today. Renee did a presentation about zines and her collection of zines and zine research. And one of the things I learned from her is that there's a way of distributing zines called piggybacking, where you walk into like a formal bookstore with like books made by publishers and stuff, and then you stick your zine into a published book, and then you just kind of wait for people to find them. So I think it's funny that Astrid is like piggybacking their own zines at home.
They can find them later.
Yeah, I like that idea of the book hugging the book. Oh,
Prue, are you did you have a comment or you're...
Prudence, are you speaking?
Prudence, are you speaking?
Cool. Connection problem?
Oh, connection problems. Okay, gotcha.
No worries. Flora says, I like boxes for zines because their spines are fragile. They need spine support. I think that's a great point. Yeah, you don't want them to be worn out or like deteriorate while you have them. So storing them, it took me a while to figure out whether this is horizontally or vertically. But storing them horizontally is a good idea, I think. And we have a lot of storage solutions based around horizontal. So Sapphire says they live in suitcases. Not so many, but now scared to branch out and collect more. Okay, hopefully this is helpful for you today, Sapphire. Sorry, I think Prue's back. Would you like to speak?
If not, there will be other chances to speak later, and also the chat the whole time. Cool. I feel like this was actually really great to see like what everyone struggles with, and I hope that some of the solutions we propose will be helpful for that. So we're gonna get into it.
Heck yeah. I like that Yiting says mine is a stack formation on a chair as a contemporary solution. Its growth is catching
Was
up.
it me who drew a red line on the? Oh, never mind, it's gone.
Okay.
You go, Kate.
Storage solutions for your zines. We have 6 of them today. Some of them are a little funkier, but like, you know, this is just a brief overview. So thanks to Jay from Mixed Rice Zines, who had the sexiest file folders I'll ever see. Like, they're just so satisfyingly clean. And then I love how there's kind of like more zines in some than others. Like, we all have like varieties in our collections, but I think if you amass a certain quantity of zines, as Jay has, you can kind of put them in these file folders, which I would say these are one of the most affordable solutions of the ones we're suggesting. And it's okay if you don't have a label maker, you can just like write on a piece of painter's tape if you like don't want to write directly on your file folder. And what I like about this solution is that it kind of fits into a bookshelf or fits into an office space. So, you know, most of us I know have like very, you know, ad hoc combinations of like bedroom and art room and bedroom and studio and like bedroom and life. So it's like, this is something that you can like tuck into a lot of different places and you might not need your very own like area. So yeah, these are a great idea for like categorizing ones. And if you don't have a lot to categorize, like let's say you only have 20 zines, I think you can probably fit them into like 2 file folders. And as you can see for the tiny ones, like the A6 or smaller zines, you can put them at the front here. So for your zines that have spines that can read, you can spine them out like a library style. But then for the ones that are a little smaller, it's like totally okay to just like store them flat. So there are options. Go to the next slide, Rach. Oh, this is just like another example of file folders. So if you're not a fan of the ones that are like a little triangle shape and get lower, you can also get the flat ones, which I heard are more popular in the US. So you can also get ones that are horizontally topped if you want to be able to tab through them. These are pretty cool, these bucket shelves. Our co-librarian Beatrix has a very cool bucket shelf. It's a little bit similar to the one on the left. And basically these are good if you want to store your zines flat and horizontally, but still be able to like look through them in a shelving style. So this is kind of like using the horizontality of a box, but making them like a little bit more accessible. So it's not like you have to like take out each box and open it each time. I think the 2 differences between these bucket shelves are that like the ones on the left, you see that have the exposed top of the shelf, these are more easy to gather dust and like also are maybe a little bit more vulnerable to humidity, but this one is like still not vulnerable to sun damage because the box is opaque, whereas the box on the right, it's a little vulnerable to sun damage because it's transparent, but it's like won't get dusty and won't have bugs. And one thing I've been struggling with is like bugs and like paper materials because I like keep a lot of letters and a lot of zines, and like I took one out the other day and it was like a horror movie. There was like bugs all over it, like crawling in all the different directions, and I like literally just screamed and I was like, no. So I think I'm going to start using the one on the right now. So I sometimes use one similar to the ones on the left, bucket shelves, but you know, going to the right, maybe what's important. Bug zine from Lit. Okay, next slide. Okay, the thing about flat files is that they're quite a storage investment. So I know a lot of us are just storing zines in the margins of our lives. So I guess this is not very appropriate for someone who doesn't have a lot of space. But if you do have a weeny bit of space on your hands and you're someone who also likes to make art or collages or embroidery, like anything that's like, you know, flat and big, I do think these flat files are really neat because things can just like not be crammed together. Like if you want to have the sensation of like, you know how sometimes when you go to like a secondhand store, they have like these kind of flat file drawers and like they put jewelry or glasses in them. And then when you pull them out, it's like all of them together and you can see all of them. It's like a very satisfying feeling. So someone wrote in the chat, flat files are the dream. I agree, Karina, they are the dream. And The one thing about them that I don't like is that they're like weirdly expensive. Like whenever I Google flat files, it's like it goes into like the hundreds of US dollars, which for like a lot of people is like a little bit too much money to spend on a storage solution. But I did get this flat file from IKEA and it was way less than $100. So that's an example of my flat file. And I put like collages and zines on the bottom 3 drawers as well as my shelf. And the one on the right is a little bit more of a traditional flat file that you see in like art schools. And like these are cool and metal. And one thing that Jay has taught me is that you can actually find some cool flat files on Craigslist if you are based in the US or you use Craigslist. So that's a good place to hunt for like secondhand flat files if you want to start investing in a really big solution for storing your zines. Okay, this is a little controversial because I honestly regret my decision to do this, but I bought CD rack shelves because I was like, CDs are kind of going out of style, but you know what's in style? Zines. And like, I really thought I could just store them like this. And now I have like 100 zines in this setup and I can never find any of them. And it's like very hard, but I will say this is like storage efficient. And this is kind of good if you don't really have like too many. Someone said zine and CD combo. I agree, Jay, that's a good idea. I think this is a good solution if you don't have like a certain amount. Let's see what Erica says. I just got one of those IKEA Alex drawers. Works really well, but sometimes hard to find exact zines and drawers if you don't remember. Totally agree. It's kind of like playing a game with yourself. We're like, what's in this drawer? And it can be a little tricky, but as you said, it's handy and works well. So glad it's working for you, Erica. But yeah, back to these CD style rack shelves. They're like a mixed solution, but I will say they're very cheap and very light. So if you just want something quick and easy and you just want to get them out of the under the bed or off the chair, I do think this is an okay solution, like for the time being. It's like a little bit of a stopgap solution, but it works. So yeah.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add, Kaitlin, I have the same kind of like CD rack bookshelf, and I find that if you store it with like more traditionally printed books, and then have the zines kind of in between, like sandwiched in between, it actually works quite well because those big books stabilize the zines themselves, and then you can kind of store the zines facing up without it like slumping because they're propped up by the sort of more conventionally printed books. So that's like another way to go about that too, and I find that that works quite well for me. And also like another benefit of these CD rack style shelves is that like, you know how when you don't have a bookend on your shelf, like all your books just go like and they tumble down like dominoes. This like prevents that entirely, and you don't have to get another book stop or like a bookend thing on your shelf. Like it's already built in. So yeah, sandwiching between books is a good way to do it. Kind of like Astrid's way of storing zines, but like in a CD rack shelf and not slipping them in, but putting them beside. La, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to add like I don't know if you're getting to it, but I wanted to show like at the far we put them in like little, like just have a backing, like a cardboard. So you like put it in this is overdue. But you put it in the like a little sleeve. So it's kind of like a vinyl, but yeah, you put it in a little sleeve and then we kind of like label it with the like whatever like code and the title and whatever. I don't know how we actually labeled them, but I forgot. Haven't been in the FAR for so long. But it's okay, you remember. But yeah,
knows now it's okay. The knowledge is being passed on.
Yeah, and then we just like slip them and you can like it doesn't fall right away. So and you can have them like consistently the same size, even if it's like, you know, like a tiny floppy zine. You just like put it in it's like the same size. Anyways, I don't know if that was helpful.
That was super helpful. I think, yeah, the pieces of card, we also often, you know, receive card and cardboard in the mail, and then sometimes we just recycle it or don't use it. But if you want to cut up your boxes and turn them into like zine stands for these packaging, it's a great way to keep them protected and from like bending and folding into each other. Oh, it looks so nice. I want to go to FAR.
Yeah, our backing is pretty specifically, like if you go to a comic book shop, like most, like there are some comics that'll just be kind of sold off the shelf, but sort of like higher value or like you know, collectible comics will almost always be sold like with a backing and in that plastic. And online you can just order like comic book backing and comic book plastic, and that's what we do. Yeah.
Oh, that's genius. And I was just gonna add that like we are by no means like experts. If anything, it's just like we all have knowledge to share with one another, and this is like a zine collectors support group for everyone who has like a chaotic zine collection, and we're all here to just like share ideas about how to best store your zines, because like Kaitlin was saying, like people have different space and like people are in different environments. Like if you're in Hong Kong versus if you're in like Vancouver or Montreal, like the storage conditions are so different. So yeah, it's just like whatever works for you, and we're just kind of sharing what we know and what we think like would work. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, your collection and your environment best. So on that note,
this is probably the most popular solution, but shoeboxes and reusable tin boxes are both affordable and dust proof. And this kind of works if you have small collections of zines that you know what they want to, like, you know how you want them to go together, and you know you want them to go together. And this is kind of like an intimate way to store things that are similar to like people who keep letters and postcards like collections. So they're not very opaque, but they are pretty solid and they are pretty tight. So I think that this is a good way. If you see the picture on the left, the zines are stacked in like a very tight way. So it's like not too loosey goosey and like quite somewhat organized if you know where they are. I just think the one thing about zines is that the nature of how they are created and the medium of most of them is that they are like kind of a little difficult to categorize and find. So like by archiving and storing them, we're sort of doing something that's like almost a little contrary to the nature of how they're made, is that they're like not always supposed to be easily legible. So I think one way that we can like preserve that kind of like chaos is like to put them in these boxes. But yeah, it's not always the most like easily categorizable or archivable solution, but it is one that works for a lot of people. Someone said, does anyone ever get zines through the mail to keep them in the envelopes because they too are special? That's a great idea, and I've seen Rachel do that. Yeah, sometimes the envelopes are also like by the artist, or they have a little drawing on them, or they have like nice washi tape. So it's important to keep the multiple components. Rachel, I still have your envelopes, Michaela says.
yeah, Mickey and I traded zines. I also was going to say one of my favorite things is actually to reuse the envelope and then pass it to another zinester, because what happens is like chances are most zinesters I know have like a random collection of like envelopes, like bubble mailers and boxes that they want to reuse. So yeah, people are giving me thumbs up. So I think that it's kind of like this, like the envelope almost like accrues this life of its own as you continue to use it. And I think it's just a really lovely way to like not only save material, save money, but also be environmentally like a little bit more conscious. So it's kind of nice. So yeah, totally, Flora. I definitely save the envelopes and sometimes even keep them in the envelopes.
Cool. Yeah, I think for those of you who are trying to avoid like single-use plastics, which are a great way of storing zines, but not everyone is like a plastic person, envelopes are a great way to go. Someone even says envelope feels like part of the zine. I agree, Yi Ting. Also nice to see you. Hi. Hi from Hong Kong to Hong Kong. Next slide. Okay, I think, wait, can we go to the previous slide for one sec? Okay. Cool. I just want to check that I numbered them correctly. Sorry, I'm a big nerd. Okay, back to tape binding, which is number 6, which I think is the final solution. So we can go to tape binding. Yes, it's a very niche style of storage. And I have to admit that I have never embarked on this, but Rachel, came across it browsing Broken Pencil Mag, which is a great resource for zines. I think it's actually also based in Canada. And this is like when you sew your zines together with a piece of paper. And it's very intense, but I think that, it works if they're all the same size, but it's quite difficult to find. I have zines of varying sizes and formats. Some of them are also spiral bound. So this wouldn't work as much for my collection, but I think for people, who are really into serial collections and really like sewing, or, if you're feeling a little anxious and you want something meditative to do with your hands that will like put your mind into a different space, maybe this will be really therapeutic. So the tape binding tutorial is at brokenpencil.com, and I just think it's like really romantic. Like when I just look at this, I'm like, I just think of the kind of person who like makes their own tea and like makes their own kombucha and like also sews all their zines. And like, if you're that kind of person who's like, you know, living under a handmade quilt, this is for you. Someone said, lol, that's Rachel. Rachel, are you the kind of person who would do this? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I hand bind my zines for one, and two, I make my own kombucha. So I think I tick all the boxes. I was going to say that another thing that's kind of cool about this tape binding concept is that I think depending on, we're going to get into this later about the actual like archiving and categorizing aspect, but I think it's interesting to consider like if you want certain zines to come together as a collection or like a certain category, it's interesting to consider like tape binding them as a way to like establish that. Like I'm just thinking, for example, if you got zines from like one person, or maybe you really like this one artist and they have like zines that are one collection, I think that's like a really cool way to bring that collection together. It's almost like you're making like your own anthology of that person's work. So yeah, something else to consider is that not just like binding them together physically, but also like thinking conceptually how those things might come together. So oh my god, Artaste makes custom binders. Wow. I've always
like all
wanted to go
these
see Artaste.
fancy, like they preserve your zine forever, or until the building's burned. And also like I also think like national library, like the Petite Patrie in Rosemont in Montreal, where the BanQ archives are, like it's really like keep it forever. There's like zines from the 1920s. Like it's like humidity controlled.
I love thinking about someone's like zine from the 1920s still being a thing. Like it's like a diary zine, and it's like, oh, today I had to ride my horse-drawn carriage, and it was like so tiring. I don't know what the 1920s was like. They probably had cars, right? Anyway, that's so cool. I don't even know if we have anything that preserves zines that long here because our history is like almost like shorter, it feels. But that's really neat that they have such watertight, weatherproof archives. Rachel, should we move to the part of our agenda that says organizing zine collections on camera, invite audience to do the same? Oh, climate proofing. You want to speak about this?
Yeah, before we go into organizing in person, I want to talk about climate proofing because everyone kind of mentioned that, like, oh, bugs, humidity is a problem. And like I was saying, everybody has different environments that they store their zines in. So one of the things that I find works really, really well is humidity moisture absorption bags. And like you may have seen them in like the bag of chips or like whatever snack you got. There's like a silica gel pack, and it always says like do not eat. But obviously don't use those because those are greasy. But I find that sometimes it also comes with other kinds of products that the manufacturer wanted to save from humidity. So I think I found them in like shoe boxes before. And I mean, just to go back a couple of slides. So on the right here is the Cure All Vancouver collection. So it's literally like in my room right now. And I took a photo this morning. And if you look, there's like a silica gel pack that I've like pulled up on top to show off, and I put that inside the shoebox as a way to absorb any excess humidity and to make sure the zines stay crisp. So if you live in a particularly humid environment, it works really well. And then just going back to what Kaitlin was saying about sun damage, another way to kind of keep your zines in good condition is to keep them out of the sun. So whether that be like putting it in an opaque box, or just like positioning your shelf or wherever it is like away from direct sunlight as needed or possible, that will help your zines from being sun bleached and having the color change. But at the same time, a part of me is also like, if your zines age, like they age, right? Like I think it really depends on like how much you want to preserve them. I think it's kind of like that conversation where some people are like, oh yeah, I always write in my books and I dog ear all the pages, and like it's mine. And other people are like absolutely terrified at that idea, and they want to keep their books in the most pristine condition ever. So I think it also depends on what kind of person you are and how much you want to kind of leave your own trace onto the zine. So I think you can decide for yourself like how you want to store them based off of that. Anything to add, Kaitlin, about storage, climate proofing in the world of storage?
I would just say if you're living in a particularly subtropical humid place like Hong Kong, I think that I do advise storing your zines in an airtight container, even though airtight containers are not very fun. And I know we usually associate them with like stuff that we collect from our childhood and like have to cart around or whatever. But I do think the humidity like very slowly warps things over time and the pages like get a little wobbly. So investing in at least a drawer, or if not a box, is an important way to make sure they don't like deteriorate past the point of being enjoyable. A lot of people are commenting in the chat that the Sicilla gel is making them think of like the zines being edible like snacks, which I kind of like. I like the idea of like a snack collection, zine collection. So should we put everyone on the spot, Rachel, and ask them to like, does the next slide say organize on camera? I forgot what it says. Yes, let's organize together. I didn't know people were going to be down for this. I don't know if people are just like hanging out and they're like, oh, now I have to do something. So if you don't want to do something, no pressure to do something. I think we'll just do, should we say like, I don't know, is 5 minutes too long? Like 5 minutes break, because also no one likes to be talked to for like half an hour straight. So should we do like a little 5-minute break? So I can set a timer and then I'll bring my zines and then I can categorize them. We can like play some music or people can just talk in the chat, but let's see if we can like, you know, use what we've learned, even though it's like so little. Okay. Jules says I will pause recording. Okay, works great. 5 minutes starting now. Before we go to the categories.
Oh, this is me. Haha. Okay, so now we're gonna go into archiving and categorizing zines, which is like not so much about the physical, but maybe more about the conceptual. So one of the ways that Kaitlin and I talked about that would be interesting way to store your zines is actually to categorize them by fair or place, or kind of like method of how you acquired them. Because I'm sure you all know, like as fellow zinesters, that often the zines you collect or acquire have a certain story to them, whether it's like a zine fair that you tabled at and went to, or if like a zinester traded with you, or it was like the first zine fair that you went to and you bought a zine for the first time. So I actually made some like samples that I want to share with y'all of like potential ways to kind of indicate that on your collection. So I was thinking that if you wanted to go with like categorizing your zines based off of a theme, but you also want to categorize them by place, it might be nice to create like, this is so simple. I literally just took a slip of paper and wrote this on, but it's just like a little tent and you just slip the paper like into your zine and it doesn't damage it. You're not sticking anything to it, but it's just like a nice way to indicate like, oh yeah, I got this at like CanZine 2020 and this is the place that I acquired them. And then I have another one. This is from Vancouver Art Book Fair and it's just a little slip. This is by a very cool artist in Toronto, Jamila Lowe. Anyway, another way to do it, if you don't mind kind of altering the state of your zines, is that you can actually put colored dot stickers on your zines, like maybe on the spine, and just kind of wrap it around the spine. And then what you can do is that you can have like a little glossary of like the colored sticker that you will use, so you know like, oh okay, like I got it from this book fair, and you can know just by looking at the spine. Because I know people were talking about how like, oh, you know, it's so hard to know like which zine is what when it's just like sitting up on the shelf. So having the colored sticker on the spine of the zine might be a nice way to categorize. Because personally, I often remember zines based off of like what fair I got it at. So that might be a way to do that if you don't mind changing the state of your zine. And like, for example, for fairs that are recurring every year, like Printed Matter Virtual Art Book Fair or Taipei Art Book Fair or Vancouver Art Book Fair. There's also, what's the one in Montreal called? Expo
Zine.
Expo Zine, right. Expo Zine. You can also, like what you can do is actually take the colored sticker, and if you want, you can write the year on it when you stick it on the spine. So like same color, same fair, but then it tells you like what year you got them. So if you're like a nerd like me and you want to remember how you like acquired your zines and the story behind them, this is a nice way to be able to do that. Okay, on to you, Kaitlin.
I want to shout out Erica W in the chat. I'm scared their message is gonna get buried. But if you scroll a little up, Erica wrote, I don't have a picture of my shelves in my studio, but I got some mini acrylic shelves normally used for nail polish to display zines on my wall. Works well for larger zines and zines with cool covers. And if you click on the link that Erica shared, it takes you to the rack. I think that's a really awesome idea. I love that you're using things meant for something else to be for zines. And I've always thought, like when I've seen those nail polish racks in Hong Kong, I've always thought that would be good for displaying like records and zines. So I'm really glad that you did it, Erica. It's a great idea. I also want to shout out Helen Ting, who's in this event, because Helen is a great illustrator and also makes zines and also helped me table at Taipei Art Book Fair, which is like the photo on the previous slide. So it's just nice to see a friend from Taipei in this event. And I want to shout out Beatrix Pang, third member of QRL, who is in the chat now. Hi, Beatrix. Okay, sorry. I'm just treating this like it's a personal radio show where I can like shout out people I love. Categories. Okay, I don't know how big y'all's screens are, but maybe the categories thing from Broken Pencil on the left is like a little tiny bit. It's a little tiny. I don't know. Is it legible for y'all? Yes, no? A-okay. Okay, great. A little bit tiny, says Jay. Okay, yeah, I'll read it out because it's a wee bit tiny. So I think people have different categories for what makes sense for their collection. So the ones that are recommended by Broken Pencil just for like their zine awards, but I think actually work quite well for like robust personal collections are zine, per zine, compilation zine, art zine, comic zine, lit zine, literary microjournal, and fanzine. And now I know a lot of you probably thinking, oh, a lot of things can be similar, like a fanzine is also a perzine. I guess it's like what's really helpful about this category thing is that there are sort of more detailed things. Like there's some things that I think are perzines but are also comics. But then if you look in the perzine category for Broken Pencil, they wrote no comics. But I think that makes sense is because, you know, zines and people naturally eschew categorization and labels. But if we were just labeling our zines for the sake of wanting to find them more easily, it's like if you think of something as more of one thing, like think of the word or the association that makes you think of that zine and then put it in that category, I think, because, you know how sometimes like we're always losing our own stuff. I think it's easy to like forget where you put certain things if the categorization or the link is like not clear. So I think coming up with your own categories that make sense for your personal interests is whatever you'd like. Jules says, FAR has 30 categories loosely based on Library of Congress categories. 30, that is like really robust and sounds very cool. Can we tab to the next slide, Rach? I think I showed some like examples of like categories I found. Yeah, I was trying to categorize my own zines because it's getting to the point that's like untenable. And I think it's kind of fun because like, you know, when you go through all of them, you have like a trip down memory lane. You're like, oh, this person, oh, this fair. And then one thing I noticed just like in categorizing like 30 zines was like, oh, you know, I have a lot of zines about work and capitalism, including like this really great zine that Rachel made at the bottom left called Da Gong Zai, just about like having a day job. It's such a good zine. So I noticed that theme amongst these 5 zines. I was like, that's a group. And then on the right, I was thinking like, I didn't notice that I collect so many zines that are just based around photography, but I was thinking, it's just like, yeah, coming up with your own categories is a way to make everything stop feeling like so specific that you can't categorize it. Like as you look in the photography zine, you'll see zines from in that photo, at least 6 different countries and like all on different topics. But I remember them because I think of photos when I think of those zines. And I usually think, oh, I want to show someone like this photo zine of, you know, cherry blossom flowers or, you know, the perzine about like daily life in Japan. So it's just about like what associations are strong for you and categorizing them based on what's convenient. And Rachel, I guess that kind of like brings us to a close where we will just sort of have like audience Q&A and hangout time. But thank you everyone for like being here so early, listening, holding space. But we're not trying to like ask you to go or anything. Like we can still have Q&A and chill, but just letting you know like the part where we share information is coming to a close.
I have a question. So you currently have like your collection right now in Hong Kong. And then Rach is in Vancouver. And how does that, like, how do you go to fairs? Like, who gets to take what zines?
That's a really good question. I'm gonna get the Vancouver collection right now because I think it'll be fun. Ugh. Shout out to my storage sponsorship, Little Burgundy Shoes. Ta-da! This is the whole Vancouver collection. It's definitely not as robust as the Hong Kong one because the Hong Kong one is where it started. But currently, the Hong Kong QRL collection is being stored at Kaitlin's place. So, to answer your question about the actual zines, what we did in the beginning, which was, I think, thinking back on it, quite excessive, was we actually took the whole collection and we would put it in a suitcase and then roll with it and go to whatever space invited us. And it made, this is thank you to Beatrix as well, because they were quite the pro in terms of like making sure that books stay in a pristine condition in travel. So I learned a lot from them about how to transport zines in a way that keeps them safe. But over time, as our collection started to grow, it became not really possible to bring our entire collection to an event. So now the way that we stay mobile is we usually curate the selection based off of the event or the venue or the theme in which we're being invited to the event. So that helps us be more mobile in terms of like having a manageable amount of zines to carry to each place. Personally, with the Vancouver collection, it's definitely a bit smaller, and there's also quite a bit more zines that are focused on people in the Asian diaspora rather than those based on the Asian continent. And that's just kind of like reflecting the environment that we're in and the people who are reading our zines. But that being said, in terms of managing the collection and how we know where everything is, Queries Library as a team, we have this master spreadsheet of all the books in our collection, all the zines in our collection. And what we do is we keep track of like the number of the zine, and then publication, like publisher, author, title, what year we acquired it, what year it was published, and then where it's located. So which collection it's in. And sometimes we have two copies. So it's like one in Hong Kong and one is in Vancouver. And so we keep that spreadsheet as up to date as possible in order to be able to keep track of it. But if folks are curious about our collection, you can actually go to our website, which I wrote the URL in there. And you can look at our collection too to check out our books. Anything to add, Kaitlin? Because you definitely have the larger chunk of our collection.
Do you mind if I also share a screen, Rach? I just want to show some stuff. But regarding Jules's question, where do you keep the QRL collection? It's kind of in both of our homes right now, with Rachel's home and with my home. And we don't have a dedicated space that's open to the public, but we do have like certain public pop-ups that we collaborate with. Like, for example, if you're based in Hong Kong, at the Center for Heritage of Art and Textiles chat, we do have like a reading corner of about, it feels like 20 QRL publications that are going to be there for 2 months, and it's open to the public and it's free. So we just try and like collaborate people who can have those kinds of open spaces. But you know, Manhattan and Hong Kong are tied for being the most expensive rent per square foot in the world. So Hong Kong isn't a tenable space to have like an independent space for queer publishing yet. Maybe a dream, hopefully. But that's a good question, Jules. Thanks for asking. And I really want to shout out like Small Toon Press / Beatrix's way of storing their zines. I didn't have a chance to add it to the PPT, but they just sent over some images that are really useful, I think. So I'm going to share a screen just to show those as like kind of fun. Oh man, sorry, I'm not very technical savvy. That was a cool comic artist. This is like some pictures that Beatrix shared with, you can see they're using file here, and they're also using like a CD style rack here. If you recognize this cover here, it's A.A. Bronson's compilation of queer zines, which you can get from Printed Matter. So it's like, you know, one thing that I forgot to mention in our presentation is that you can use multiple things based on your different kinds of zines. Because some of you mentioned, you know, you have certain bigger things and smaller things. So I think the solution is a really great way to manage like different types of zines and different shapes of zines. And this is additionally, this is a photo of the really epic bucket shelf they had, which I honestly loved browsing through. And you can tell they're really good at taking good care of things because almost everything is in a plastic sleeve. But yeah, these bucket shelves are kind of good if you have like this many zines that you want to be able to page through like that. I agree with their friend Oren Tongtai. This is very good of a solution. And in closing, for their current zine collection, I'm gonna go to my downloads. So this is a clear box. These kinds of clear storage boxes are very good in Hong Kong to prevent from humidity and sun damage. These are more like archival boxes. A lot of people use these for records. When I worked at a radio station, we put almost our records in these. These are also good for things that you don't necessarily like need to see up, but you would like probably label them to find what's in them. Yeah, the archive boxes are good for different package scenes at which you can like kind of tab through, and like if they're clearly labeled, you'll know what they are. These are really cool objects that I don't see as much in North America, but probably exist there too. But I mainly find these in Asia. I guess I would just call these like document holders. And like tabling with Zine Coop for the past few years, I noticed that we use a lot of these like really big plastic folders. Like there are plastic folders that you just like put a form in, and then there are plastic folders that are like this, which like are really great for just storing like a few zines. And some of them are box style like this with a lid, and other ones are clasp. I don't have a class style one on me. I think I can read the chat, but basically they're just like these kinds of like totally like waterproof document holders that you can get if you're based in Asia at any of the stores called like Japan Home Living Store or Aeon. They have these really good like book and zine holders that are really great. Like if you meet up with a friend and they're giving you a really nice book and you don't want it to like get all messed up in your tote bag, I really recommend these. Yeah, those are their zine storage solutions that I wanted to share because I think they're very handy, and they have a really big and robust collection of art books, and they're also publishers, so they really know a thing or two about how to take good care of books. So that is what I wanted to share with my screen. And I'm gonna check the chat. Let's see. Yi Ting says about the document boxes, I believe they are commonly seen in law firms. I think that yes, these are versatile solutions that work for everyone, including lawyers. Someone wrote Muji stationery goals. Yes, I agree. Do we have any questions, or should we just like hang out and like smile at each other for a few seconds before we return to our capitalist lives?
Do you think you're gonna have a more, because your collection is growing and growing, do you see like a foreseeable future where there's like a more, I don't know if you're gonna rent out a space or like have more permanent storage solutions, or you're just like gonna have a pile in your house forever?
feel a little accused. No, yeah, I think the thing with renting a space is that it's wonderful to like have drop-ins. Like we have a friend named Yo Katami who's based in Tokyo, and he has a space called Loneliness Books. Their website is qpptokyo.com, which stands for Queer Printed Products Tokyo. I love it so much. But he says like, yeah, he kind of has to make it appointment based because, you know, it's like also his work studio. And what I find with pop-ups is that if you give people like a designated time to go and it's like limited time, psychologically, they're a little bit more likely to go because they think it's going to end. And that's the one thing I struggle with the idea of opening a permanent space, is that if it's always there, people might take it for granted and not come. And then it's like, how would you make it feel worth it if people aren't coming? When it's like, obviously it's worth it because queer stories deserve to take up space and deserve to exist and be everywhere. But at the same time, like making sure that it's like serving the community you want it to serve and meeting people's needs, I do think is a challenge we haven't thought through much yet, because QRL is like something that we basically do like on the fly in as much as we can fit it in between our like 3 other jobs respectively. So I do think that we want it to grow sustainably and we want to like keep tending for it in the way that we can. But I think we also like see our limits, and I'm not sure if opening a space is like on the direct agenda. But you know, I'm not going to jinx it, but I do think I do like the process of collaborating with other spaces though. Like I would say at this point we've collaborated with like at least 10 other like bookstores, cafes, queer spaces, and it feels really good to like meet those people and work with them and just like form more of a community instead of like, because Rachel and I were talking about this in respect to like cool independent magazines. We were kind of saying like, it's kind of funny how like every time you read like the editor's letter to the first issue of a new art magazine, they're like, I never saw anything like this out there, so I had to make one. And it's like great, but it's also kind of like, why are there like 4,000 of these like really artsy magazines always being made with like the same kinds of photography and design every time? So no hate to fine art magazines, but the point I'm making is that like instead of always making a new one and starting a new one, like who can you already work with, or whose work can you uplift and spotlight by collaborating with someone who exists already? So I kind of feel like that's how we approach spaces. But Rachel, do you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I mean that was so well said, Caitlin, as always. But I was just gonna add that I think part of the beauty of like moving around and our zines following us is that it's like, because I mean everyone on our team is queer, so it's kind of like an extension of ourselves in some way. And frankly, the way that QRL began was that Caitlin and Beatrix met up, and then we're looking at each other's collections and the queer printed matter that they own, and then it was kind of collectively their own personal collections came together to become Queer Reads Library, and then we started to add on in addition to that initial collection. So I think in that way, like Queer Reads Library is kind of like an extension of ourselves. And as I grow the QRL Vancouver collection, it's quite the same. So I think personally, it would be hard to part with the zines and not have it in a pile that's organized chaotic in my room, and have it in a space. And just to add on to what Caitlin is saying, I think when you have like a designated space for the library, you kind of have what, you know, the usual suspects, like the people who usually end up coming to the space. It's like other queer folks who are interested in printed matter, and that's like a guarantee. But we've found that in this particular configuration where we travel from place to place, we end up engaging with so many more people that probably wouldn't have gone to something called Queer Reads Library, but because they happen to be in this other space that they frequent or are interested in, then they encounter our library and then build that connection that way. So that's kind of why we choose to be mobile, is because it just brings so many opportunities for connection that wouldn't usually happen if we're in a physical space. Also, physical spaces cost money, so and we are not necessarily abundant in that at Queer Reads Library. So yeah.
One of the curators who works at Chat mentioned they saw some like elderly folks reading the Queer Reads Library recently, and it just makes me think like, you know, I don't know how many chances like these folks get to go to like indie bookstores and cafes, like the usual people that we work with. So we're trying to like, you know, hit a certain like cross-generational cross-section of the population, including people who might identify as allies and not part of the community, I guess, because it's like, do we want to preach to the choir? Do we want to reach different people? Is a question that we ask ourselves sometimes. But Jules wrote, I know that you're like part of FAR, but I guess I want to read your comment. I think it's helpful. Never underestimate the importance of consistent space. Where there is space, people who care will come. Grants are key. So maybe that is the future. Who knows? That would be really cool. Wait, I want to like, Rachel, to close out the event, should I share this photo that Beatrix shared of a cat guarding their zine collection? Can I do that? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna embarrassingly share my screen again, but yes. Beatrix wrote in the chat, this is my private zine collection guard. This is obviously the best way to store zines, is with a big cat on top. But thank you everyone for being here. I think if we don't have any more questions, we can probably round out, although, you know, this is very fun. I don't want to like hold people up, but yeah, thanks for being here everyone.